everybody. Bam, there we go. Okay, welcome, folks, Virgin Islanders, concerned residents, our larger Virgin Islands community, for joining our second Dear USVI Town Hall, addressing gun violence in our territory. Loved ones, I'm wearing all black because of the funerals. I feel like this is a funeral to some degree because what can I say? When will the carnage end? We began the last town hall calling the names of the deceased. We're going to do that again. And we're going to call the names of our fallen family who basically died since the last town hall, which was April 29th. So the names are Jamal Jacobs, age 39. Ellen Pratt, age 28. Mendel Felix, age 32. Vernon Rollins, Oliver Christian, Ricky Ashby, Aaron Ashby, Kamal De Silva. On St. Croix, Jacoby Charles, age 22. Selena Chloe, age 19. Terrence James, 38. Nathaniel Haywood, age 23. Jonathan Fontaine, 28. Shamal Rivera, 30. Aaron Joseph, 21. Kaleem Ramsey, age 26. I think I did some data research that shows the average murder victim by gunfire in our territory is between the age of 25 and 27. We look at a character profile. A majority of our deceased come from our lower income, disenfranchised community. I'm in Miami, folks. As of late June, Miami, which is about 500,000 people, we've had about 46 homicides. Atlanta, about 500,000 people, 50. Let's do the math. We have only 100,000 people. I think the last numbers show that we're the fourth highest murder, I'm stressed out about this, murders per capita in the world. It's an election year. I respect our leaders. I think that leadership is taxing. I think the burden of being an elected official is one that most people can't understand. But heavy is who wears the crown. So I've seen a lot of our lawmakers celebrating. I don't know what we're celebrating, because as of right now, our murder rate says we're a failed state. Anywhere else in the world, we're a failed state. We just had somebody on the waterfront, a lady got shot at on the waterfront. That could have been my mother. That could have been any one of our mothers, our grandmothers. The most recent murder, the young man, the 14-year-old, it really bothered me. But the young man, Kamal De Silva, I think I shared with everyone that I used to watch him on Facebook, and I thought he had a world of talent. I just felt it should have been, if he had somebody that directed a certain way. And I literally wrote on my notepad, Peter, find this young man, give him a call. That was, I think, right after the hurricanes. He had posted a live, and the guy was smart. You know, he was charismatic, but he was a very bright guy. Now he's gone. So with further ado, our panelists, we have Lisa J., a rising musician back home on St. Thomas. We have musical ambassador Benny D. back. We have artist, culture bearer, and designer Kurt Marsh from St. John. We have culture bearer, artist, and journalist Shalana Brown from St. Croix. We have Pastor Gilman Rose from St. Thomas, but he's in Brooklyn right now. And we're happy to have our lawmaker of residence in the town hall, Senator Alicia Barnes from St. Croix. And I wanted us to really have a cross section of Virgin Islands, because I keep the first time, oh, Peter, we're the Crucians, we're the St. Johnians. Well, we're all one family now. And as usual with the Bible, my mother will be happy that, you know, the Bible says a child will lead them. So Alicia, once again, we're gonna have you open since you're the youngest person on the panel. I asked you in the last panel, Lisa, how do you feel about the future of the Virgin Islands? I'm gonna ask you that today again. And I'm gonna also ask you as a young lady who is coming up in the world, who's dating, who's, you know, coming of age. When you see our young men just randomly wiping each other out, I have a bone to pick. When I was home, I've seen a lot of our young people. I've heard girls say, well, my man is a killer, and bragging about this culture of violence. I want you to tell us, Lisa, what do you feel once again about the future of our home? And what do you feel about the state of our young men as it relates to you as a young woman?
Well, as mentioned, you know, I am a young female adult growing up in the Virgin Islands, and that gangster thing, that's not attractive to me. I think young females like myself have the wrong perception of life. Who they're attracted to has a lot to say about who they are, and I think that starts at home, how their mother interacts with the father, or how they see their mother or aunts, sisters interact with other males. I think it starts there. But me personally, that is not attractive. If I'm with a guy, I want to make sure that his goals are met, my goals are met, and we not only build a bond, but I just don't condone that behavior. So that's not attractive to me. It's not. In terms of the future, I do see a change. Like I said on the previous live, I do see a drastic change. I'm not going to give up on the youth, but a lot has to be done within the community. And I think we as a community have to find an alternate way in resolving differences and not judge everyone's household, because everybody grew up in a different scenery. Every parent has their way of brought up, so we can't be biased and judge everyone's upbringing, but rather try to solve it amongst ourselves.
Thank you. Kurt Marsh, you're new to the panel, but I've always loved your mind, brother. You got a brilliant mind that I think our community could benefit from. You're a very innovative young man. We had a conversation on St. John that moved me. I don't know if you had remembered when I was touring the lands where the revolt had occurred. And you talked about coming back home as a native Virgin Islands, as a young person, and feeling, wow, I don't even know where I belong. You talked about this anger, this frustration that I had when I would come home from college and I would see people from away and tourists and different people and driving and feeling like, is this my home? Feeling like, why is it those of us born and raised there, we seem to be having the lease of paradise? And while we were on your property, there was a person that discussed that story. And I'll let you tell that story and speak on that discussion of being a young millennial with the future at your grasp, but the infrastructure is not necessarily in place to attain what you dream of. Kurt?
So, good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot, Peter, for the invite to be on this panel. I want to start by making a correction.
Oh, sorry.
You said, no. You mentioned coming home and not understanding where you fit in.
That's what it was, yes.
But the reality is, I know exactly where I fit in. As a deeply rooted ancestral St. Johnian, I know exactly what my place is. And the fact that the reality that we face in the Virgin Islands right now is that our colonial structure and then our dependency on the federal government and tourism and the apparatus as it is doesn't facilitate my being here the way I would expect it to. So that's the real that's the reality. You and I and everyone else on this panel, as Janelle knows, we understand our place within this context, right? But the reality is all the systems are fighting against that and not facilitating it. So I think something we're facing, as I'm speaking as a young person right now, I think we have an issue in the Virgin Islands because I'm seeing it happening a lot elsewhere, and I'm a little frustrated that it's not taking place here. We have an issue where people of a certain age group and generation feel like young people are apathetic somehow to the realities that we face. And I don't think that does justice to the young people like Shalana, myself, everyone else on this, Lisa, I haven't met her before, and yourself, who are active in spaces in the territory and beyond, doing things and moving in spaces where we're trying to have these very critical conversations about where we are and then where we go moving forward. So I think, first of all, there needs to be a recognition, right, by elders in our community that young people are here and we are aware. And in very many instances, we're not given opportunities to be present. We're not given opportunities to work. We're not given opportunities to labor beyond our own capacity because we're doing the work, right? But we're doing the work in very limited ways sometimes because we're doing what we can with what we have and what we can source. And a lot of times that's not a whole lot. So I think we need to have a conversation about empowering young people, right? And then I have a lot more to say, but I'll leave it there for now.
Shalana, I saw you nodding your head. And on Kurt's point, what I find very interesting, if we know the space where we're at, but our young people isn't given a sense of ownership over the narrative, over the future. We say, well, why are they just killing each other randomly? Well, if they don't have nothing to lose, because they don't have nothing to own, if they're starting with zero, why aren't they going to be in the streets killing each other? Shalana, please, St. Croix has had some grisly past couple of days. I saw a video of a young man, which I don't ever want to see again. Then I saw a loved one berate, saying, I'm coming to kill whoever. I'm watching, it happened in St. Thomas too. I'm just saying, I'm watching a disconnect from humanity, a wanton disregard for feeling, for life. I gotta think that comes from a sense of hopelessness, a lack of self-value, because happy people don't kill people. When you're successful, you're too busy living, being successful. Shalana, please speak from your scope as a young millennial as what is going on here.
Yeah, so there's, in my opinion, several factors. So it can't just be, it's not just one thing. And I jot it down because when you invited me to have this discussion, it was an ongoing discussion within my groups of friends. And we narrowed it down to elitism, colonialism, and capitalism. Elitism, because as you said in your opening statements, a lot of this affects persons who would be classified as poor. And so others don't really care because if you have a certain status and you coming out of a more middle class or upper class social status, you don't believe that it affects you, and you think that the only reason why people get killed is because they were dealing in something that they shouldn't have. But that's disregard, because we have disregarded persons who are in need in our community, and we've left them to these situations. Colonialism, because of identity. I do want to point out though that white persons are having identity issues. We're not the only people of color are the only persons without fathers and so forth. So I just want to point that out as well. But because we are people of color, we have to deal with our own in-house situations first, correct? So colonialism, because we don't have an identity, we've grown up in statuses where young men whose fathers may have been in criminal activity and have maybe still living or out of the game, and they saw their fathers get big up when they go out, and that's thing father, yeah, your father was a real gunman, and that's what they attain to be. And that's because it gives them some sort of identity. And the other thing is also we have to address our Virgin Islands identity, because we don't have a single identity that we're buying in. We have groups of people and they're living in their own identities, but we don't have a status quo identity that everybody can buy into. And the third one is capitalism, and that is about your individual worth. And that's also about colonialism. So we're like Bob Marley, I did this quote, possession make you rich. I don't have that type of richness. My richness is in life forever. So you were talking to Lisa, and you know, young men, you may not have a lot. And I think they think their identity is in having money, having things. And if you don't have opportunities, like we know we have lack of opportunities here. And not to say persons are dumb, because you could be a person who may not be able to read or write well or do, administrative work well, but you are important and you can give back in a certain way. But if they're not given those opportunities, the next life is street life, and that becomes your identity and your worth. They want young ladies. They think that in order to get young ladies' attention and to get street cred, it's about capitalism, about how much I could get, how much I could look like I'm expensive, I'm worth something, and because of the things you have. And I just want to also point out that before the transfer of the Danish West Indies to the Virgin Islands, people were very, very poor, but we had a sense of self. And leading up to the 50s, people weren't what you call economically wealthy, but we had a strong sense of self and community. So capitalism also has a big play in what we feel about ourselves individually.
Shalana, thank you. What you said was so powerful, because I've thought about that. They always say, well, wherever you find poor, people are going to kill each other. That's not true. They always think that, and I think what you said touched me, because I've battled that in my own career of going through the phases of excess materialism to start to reconnect with my spiritual ancestral self, which is, why do we always have to adopt the idea of wealth and success that are planted upon us? So I'm happy with your point also about identity, because man, if we don't know who we are, hell. Having said that, I'm going to take it over to Benny. Benny, in the last discussion, we talked about music and culture. We're going to elaborate upon this a little bit further with everybody else. And we said that, well, Peter, we don't think it's the music or entertainment. Well, I kind of said, okay, is music and art a reflection of the environment that's going on? Because if there's not murders and mayhem and guns and violence, then the artist won't be able to speak about that. But what I've seen is there's a lot of things that go on in poor areas, not only the shootings and the murders. So most people in low income areas are good, hardworking people. They just can't afford to live somewhere else. So let's touch on the topic, Benny, of the 2 points, because I went to the Facebook page of a lot of the young men killed. The last kid, I think, is Kaleem in St. Croix. If you go to this young man's page, it is nothing, and it's not to judge this young man. We're trying to get an understanding here. It is post after post from Chicago hip hop. It's post after post about GDs, gangsters, disciples. Come on. It's post after post. The young man, Kamal, that I said that had touched me, when I listened to his Facebook Live, his direct words were, the ops could die forever, or forever the ops could die or whatever. The ops, those of us who are not young of this generation, when we refer to ops, that's gang culture, that's the enemy. That is not Caribbean culture, people. That is not Caribbean culture. Benny, you also touched upon a very powerful point that our people there's no economic opportunities. Like we said before, young men have jobs, they're not in the street killing people. Benny, touch on that point that you mentioned before about the lack of economic opportunity. And is it a culture of violence through music and art that our young people are buying into? And are they susceptible to that culture of music? Because like the young men in Chicago, they can relate to being economically disenfranchised.
All right. So what I can say is, in many of the poorer areas, we can find ourselves being the best at recycling the cycle. That's what we do over and over. We recycle the cycle. Our parents before us talked about how we were when we were coming up, and now us now as parents are talking about the younger generation and how they're coming up. And I think at some point, we ourselves who went through this, we failed, just like our parents failed in changing the cycle. All we did is recycle it, right? So, case in point, you have some people that would live in the projects generation after generation after generation. This is their way of life. This is their way of living. This is the only thing that they know or that they feel is their comfort. For whatever reason, there's no aspirations to say, man, this is not the environment I want to stay in. This is not the environment I want to continue raising my kids in. The things that I went through as a kid, I don't want that for my kids. Too many times you see people not trying to change that cycle, right? So once again, from us as kids and getting into the nonsense that we were getting into on the streets, now you find yourself recycling that same thing with your kids now coming up. And just like the young lady was saying, because your dad or your mom was getting props for what they did from back in their times, now it goes right into the kid. And the kid, instead of the parent now teaching the kid, hey, what I did and the things that I was doing was completely wrong. I want different for you. They're not actually doing that. Or even if they are saying that they're doing that, they're not showing it by changing the kid's environment. Once again, it's recycled. Because if you're not trying to do everything inside of you to create opportunities or to remove yourself from these environments, then once again, over and over and over again, we're going to have the same thing happening. So as you named out all the people who died, so many of them didn't even live to see their 30s. They didn't have an opportunity to see their 30th birthday. You know, so for people like myself who was told by adults when I was 16 and 17 years old that I would not even live to see 18 or 20 years old, now at 43 years old, somewhere in between that time of 18 to 43, I had to make the conscious decision that I would not become a statistic. I will not allow that adult that told me that I would be dead by 18 or 20 to prove them right. I needed to make sure that I proved them wrong. And for whatever reason, it seems like not too many times or not enough times, we're getting this type of mentality or attitude from the younger guys or the younger women coming up in the environments now to say, hey, I want to change the cycle that I see my parents go through, or I want to change a cycle that I'm seeing for myself right now. Too many of my friends are passing away. Too many of my friends are acting as if this is normal. This is not normal. The things that we went through as kids, for me and you, Peter, in Friedenhoy, and many of our peers in Friedenhoy, and then Anna's Retreat, and then Bavoni, the Nada, all these is our stomping grounds, right? On the boulevard. For us to see the type of things that we've seen live with our own eyes, it's not normal. And in today's market, they've changed that to now being videos and pictures. As I explained to y'all earlier, that I had the pictures of the young man that got shot in the head. We're passing it around. Now it becomes some sort of a conditioned normality for these young kids. So whether someone pulls a gun or someone shoots up somewhere, for anyone that survives it, it becomes a laughing matter. It becomes, well, yeah, such and a talking point. Such and such happened last night. Hey, but are we still going to the club tonight? You know what I'm saying? It just turns right into that same cycle. So I think a lot of times it's left on us, the older generation, to try our best to instill in these young men and these young women who are coming up now, try to instill in them that these things that they're going through and that they're doing are not normal. It wasn't normal for us. Now we're having a better understanding through education and through our worldly travels, being able to actually see the world, get out of these environments that we were so, invested into. How many times did we know or see or been involved in trauma because of the neighborhood that you were defending? And now when you remove yourself from the neighborhood now, 5 years, 10 years removed, now you're thinking, wait, why in the world was I defending the neighborhood? I didn't own my house. My mother never owned her house. She was on Section 8. I came from a Section 8 upbringing. Why was I defending the turf or the neighborhood? So sometimes it takes for us to get these people educated, and sometimes it takes for us who's away to actually go to the turfs. I talked to you about this, Peter. A lot of the people who we are trying to reach through these forums and through these conversations, they're not on this live. They're not listening to us at all. Really and truly, they look at every last one of us on these panels now as squares. It also happens that we're in squares and rectangles here. That's the way that they actually look at us now, because we're not representing anymore. We're not down for their cause. We don't understand what it's like living where they live and how they live, as if we didn't go through all of this stuff, as if we were not 20 years old before, right? So many times it still takes for us to be brave enough, even when our older peers in the islands are on these or in these neighborhoods are telling us, man, we have no control over these youngins. It takes for us to be brave enough to go back to these neighborhoods and go back on these turfs and be able to have conversations with these young men and young women, because that's what's lacking in a lot of places. A lot of them are not being talked to. Sometimes that's all it takes, is a conversation for you to be able to open the minds of someone whose mind has not been opened yet. They see a narrow path, and their path is straight towards death, and they have absolutely no fear of death. That's my take right now. Unmute, Peter, unmute.
Unmute, yeah.
Can everyone mute their phones? Wow. Okay, great. Can we just mute while the other? Bane, that was powerful. What you touched on was the fact that, yes, say the incident that just occurred, that's a war. It's when you grow up in certain environments, certain things, you see it, it's common sense. One guy gets killed, next guy get killed, that's a turf war. That's rivals. So if a person like Benny, who's respected by these young men for his prowess in the musical world, was able to just go in there and have a conversation, some of this could have been quelled. So having said that, the next person I'm going to ask is Senator Barnes. As a lawmaker who is in charge of, well, helping to craft an environment that's conducive to the future of our young people, a lot of times, like what Benny just expressed, there is essential bridges are not formed. And these are simple bridges. Like he just expressed, there's a disconnect. These disconnects have been existing before I was born. We just looked at the young men that were killed, all in low-income areas. I'll just say it what it is. We don't give a damn. Somebody asked me earlier, well, Peter, that's all the lower class folks. Okay, let's have a conversation, Virgin Islands. It's 100,000 people. St. Thomas is 32 square miles. St. Croix, I believe, is 80. Forgive me for my wrong geography. 80, a little bit bigger than St. Thomas.
84 square miles.
84 square miles. St. John, I believe, is 30 or 20, a little bit smaller than St. Thomas. What classes are we talking about? To the larger outside world, we're all a bunch of island people in bush. I'm just going to be real. When you travel the world and you engage with people, what's the Virgin Islands? Who's that? What's that? Now, we know how special we are. What I'm saying is the concept of this classism, these cliques, with you over there, we over there, those of us in the States, you ain't really from home anymore. What are you talking about? So I'm going to ask you as a lawmaker, Senator Barnes, who is recently stepping down, and you had a letter, you expressed some frustration. From somebody who was away, got educated, I feel you in many ways represent the frustration of an innovative mind facing a certain wall that's not too accepting of progress, of change. And somebody like yourself and other people who can bring innovation, I'm going to gamble that if a lot of these ideas were nurtured and fostered, we wouldn't have these much bodies on our streets. So please explain to me some of your struggles and some of your take on being a lawmaker in creating an environment that empowers our future and not keeps it stagnant.
Well, thank you for that, Peter, and good afternoon, good evening to my fellow panelists, and thank you for having me. It's truly a pleasure to join you and to participate in this very important and relevant discussion. And I think that, I came of age, I graduated from high school in 1984. And there was never a time in my upbringing, and I grew up in Montbijou. My mother was a domestic worker. My father was a lifeguard, a fisherman, and a taxi driver. And I tell my story. And I came from a family where we just knew hard work. And there was never a time when between me and my peers that we felt hopeless. And I think what we're experiencing now in this territory amongst the young people, it's a sense of hopelessness and a sense of purposelessness. And I often say that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so there is a disconnect in persons feeling that those of us who are elected officials truly care for their well-being. And I often say as well that hurt turned inward is depression, and hurt turned outward is anger. And what we're seeing right now in our community is a manifestation of a hurt community. My daughter attended St. Croix Educational Complex, so she has friends on every level of the socioeconomic ladder. And I have been with my daughter in some neighborhoods where I would feel very angry if I were allowed to live in such a neighborhood. So when you wake up in the morning and you have to walk, more than a mile to catch a bus to go to school, and you have to wait for that bus that may never come, it's easy to drop out and not bother. When you have friends, there was one Saturday I had to pick my daughter's friends up from Frederick. They waited, three young ladies, they waited an hour and a half for public transportation that never came. So I had to leave East End to pick them up in Frederickstead, to take them to a pool party that we were having. So when our young people are experiencing these realities, there's a disconnect, and they feel that the government, that their leaders simply do not care, and they take matters in their own hands. And if we don't begin to recognize that our actions are impacting the youth in this community, then we have failed. And so to me, it is important that we do a couple of things. I am an advocate for funding and reestablishing the Commission on Youth. And the Commission on Youth was a government entity, an office under the office of the governor that specifically geared towards youth activities. And it wasn't just sport activities, because we put so much emphasis in recreation, but it was a holistic approach to nurture our youths and to follow them from cradle to the point when they go off to college, or if they go to trade school or go into the workforce. But it was an active mentoring activity to ensure that we empower the young people in this territory. So legislatively, while the Commission on Youth is still on the books, it needs to be funded and staffed in earnest. And then we need to create an opportunity for economic activity. There is opportunity for economic growth and economic development, but there has to be economic activity to incentivize entrepreneurship. And I'm telling you that if we give entrepreneurship opportunities to our young Black and brown men and women, we're going to see a decrease on gun violence and just the violent activity on our street, but it has to be done in earnest. And then in terms of what Shalana said, we have to begin to have the discussion in earnest as it relates to our political and self-determination. We have just stopped. As a people, we have just stopped. We are not progressing. We got to a certain place in our political evolution and we just stopped. We got complacent. We're not discussing in earnest constitution. We just had a primary election that was a deplorable and piss poor turnout, that anyone that's victorious in that primary, is it really a victory based on the low participation? And we cannot simply blame COVID. So we have some apathy in this community as well. And then there needs to be a collective vision. And that collective vision then needs to be able to be communicated to every person in this territory that would begin to instill hope. So what we have are great managers, but we don't have visionary leaders that are speaking to where are we going to take the Virgin Islands in the next 20 years, in the next 30 years, in the next 50 years. Where is our plan of action to get there? And what are the things that we need to do to empower our young people to be there when we get there? So to me, it's such a multifaceted type situation that we're dealing with. And it is unfortunate that is being manifested on our streets, but it's being manifested in the legislature. It's being manifested on Facebook. It's being manifested on the talk shows. We may not be gunning each other down in the Senate or on Facebook or on talk, but the character assassination, we're murdering each other in this community. And I think it's rooted in self-hate. And the moment we see someone that's successful, that's doing well, that broke the barrier, instead of celebrating them, they have to be corrupt. They had to have done something wrong. They have to be up to something sinister. So we need to get back to basics in this community. We need to get back to the fundamentals. I grew up poor, but I grew up with dignity. I grew up where we sat at the dinner table every evening and we ate. And whether it was white rice, cream corn, corned beef, and lettuce and tomato, we had a meal and we sat and we ate every night and we spoke. My mother ironed her pillowcase. It might have been two, where we had to change, every Saturday you change out one set of sheets for the next. But we had dignity in our upbringing. We were poor, had dignity. When we talk about housing communities, all of us either grew up like on St. Croix. If you weren't in Shabbat, you were in Kennedy, you were in Harrigan Court. My dad grew up in Mali. My uncle was in Shabbat. My cousins were in Kennedy. I grew up in Mambidu. It wasn't where we stayed. It was the transition to somewhere else. And so we've just gotten stuck. So we have to begin now to create an environment that would change just the overall mindset. Our education system has to be based on that vision. Our banking laws have to be based on that vision. Our socioeconomic decisions that we make have to be based on that vision. We need to start with a collective vision of who we are as a people, where we want to go, how we're going to get there. The Bible says, without a vision, the people perish. And we are perishing for lack of vision and for lack of purpose. And we need to begin to have the discussion of self-determination, who we are as a people, where we want to go, and begin to instill hope, dignity, and pride in our community.
Thank you so much, Senator Barnes, for your candid and honest take on things. I've heard people say, well, Peter, another discussion. A right discussion is what inspires and lays the blueprint to move forward. When we have this discourse, the information garnered, we can't get anywhere if we don't understand each other. We don't have any sense of clarity.
Right.
Having said that, so plan of action. It's no secret that I testified among some other folks, Pastor Monroe's, on a measure to create a gun prevention office. Having said that, am I a political guy? No. I am a guy who is drawn to any cause or effort that I see in earnest is trying to address a problem. Having said that, can any measure be bulletproof? No. Can anything be perfect? No. But a foot in the right direction to something is more than nothing. So for those who say the discussion, these discussions lay the groundwork to understand the task at hand, where we have to go, and then we carry that force to the political office. A lot of millennials email and ask me, well, Peter, we're talking when nobody's hearing. And I will say this, as much as I love my millennials, to gain progress in this world, talking on Facebook, venting, expressing yourself is one part of the plan. The next is, what do we do to use that voice to shape policy? So having said that, Pastor Monroe's, before you discuss your take on the gun violence and any measure that may be to address it, because you guys have won me over in earnest, because one of the factors the measure brings up is violence interrupters. So see a guy like Benny could have went out there and addressed that. But Pastor, before we address that, you're a minister, and I'm just gonna be blunt. Studies have shown that right now Christianity and religion they're like Trump, they're down the polls. I have friends who are atheists. We have approximately about 150 churches throughout the US Virgin Islands. St. Thomas is 32 square miles. I think about more than 50 of them is in St. Thomas. That's what, 2 churches or more per square mile. but we got blood on the streets. So historically, the faith community is supposed to be a safe haven, a refuge to steer this away. I'll be blunt. Sometimes I wonder if a lot of church folks, just the pastors want people back in church to get the tithes and offerings. I'm just going to be honest. My point is, no one is listening to the faith community right now, majority, and no one respects the faith community right now. Having said that, you are more of a progressive-minded servant of God, and discuss the church's role, faith-based communities, because the initiative, the bill that you're championing says to bring different programs, the faith-based communities under one umbrella to address these issues. So speak a little bit on the role of the church, which, like I said, you guys are not popular right now. And where do you see this measure going, and how can it take this discussion into the real world and form policy to help us to get to where we're trying to go?
Yeah, thank you again, Peter, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening to everyone. You know, every major movement in America began from the church, and we know that as well. Civil rights era, women's right to vote. If you look at every major civil rights movement in America, started out of the church, and we were the bedrock of our societies. One of the things that we had moved away from is that the church started to preach at the culture as opposed to preach within the context of the culture. And I think that it depends on how you read the Bible. You can see that even Apostle Paul, was speaking to the Stoics and the Epicureans, who were philosophers of the day. And as opposed to downing them and saying that the culture is not right, he started to show them God within their own variation of the culture in which they served. So the church really and truly has kind of moved away and lost its grip on social justice and the movement of morality and justice, the upright, making sure that the people who are on welfare still have the dignity, and knowing for sure that the churches actually grew within urban America, within the projects, within the ghettos. If you go to every major city and quote unquote in the Black communities, you always have what you call the Black church. And the Black church was created just for that, to take care of Black issues of people who were disenfranchised. So churches in the United States Virgin Islands, St. Thomas and Croix St. John, you know, pastors have a different approach to the idea of speaking of an event or speaking of the condition of the world, but not necessarily doing action on the street engagement. And so my ministry is different because I am an on the street, hands-on type of individuals. And yes, of course, the Barna research shows that, you know, millennials are leaving the church, but the church is still vibrant. We still continue to bury all of those individuals who have left the churches. We still continue to support the families of the people that we're talking about, the young men who grew up. You know, I was born in RCS Heights in St. Croix, poor, and then moved over to St. Thomas. My father was a moving evangelist, so we end up in both islands and grew up in Tonki, Ras Valley. So I think that the message of faith leaders is that we have to bring our experience, even though we have quote unquote Jesus. We have to bring the radical, free-thinking idea of a Christ who were not in stainless glass and had no place to lay his head. He was on the street. They call him, listen, you are wrong sinners. And so the gospel to me is really in the book of Luke chapter 4, where I believe that our calling is to the poor, our calling is to those who are impoverished, our calling is those who are in prison. Not just prison. My prison ministry is not in prisons. My prison ministry is before the individual get to the prison, to call out the injustices. A document, Dr. King said, is a moral document. A budget, sorry, is a moral document. When you look at the Virgin Islands Police Department, receive about what, $52 million. The Board of Education is about $1 billion or more. I don't really know the exact number. And when you look at, the senator just talked about a youth service arm that is not funded, you know, the budget is our moral document. We have to put our priorities in the right place. So what I will say, so that we can continue the discussion, is that the idea of the bill to create the Office to Prevent Gun Violence is just that, to create all of these ideas and ideals, to put all of these services, all the nonprofit organization into one to deal with the violence in a very comprehensive way. And that is from a faith-based standpoint, but it's also from the idea when you heard of the Boston Miracle, churches were the first one who were doing cure violence and being the violence interrupters. It was done with the Black Panthers serving food to students. These were faith-based approaches. So I think that we can really regain the trust of our community if they see for sure that we're not just about quote unquote the money, but really we're about the people.
Peter?
Yes, well said, Pastor. Thank you. Yes, Senator Barnes.
No, I just wanted to just tell the pastor that he's absolutely correct in that, you know, the church in the Virgin Islands has to become relevant once again. The church has to take a stand on relevant issues, and it cannot be every Sunday just, you know, within the four walls of the sanctuary, getting high on the Holy Ghost, and then going back Monday and acting as though, you know, all is well. The church has to get in the trenches because government cannot do everything. And that is the problem that we've had in our community, where there's an expectation that government is supposed to address all of our ills. And the church has to be able to pick up the slack and be able to become relevant once again in society and take a stand on those hard issues.
Thank you, Senator.
Agreed.
Before we move forward to the next round of discussion, I want to thank our partners who have partnered with us on this town hall. We have VIA, we have the Office of Senator Myron D. Jackson, and we have the University of the Virgin Islands Center for Professionalism and Spirituality. Now, we had a couple comments and questions that were emailed before. We're going to open it up to the other questions. I see a lot of folks commenting on Facebook, but I definitely want to give precedence to the folks who emailed in before. So this message is from Bridget Berry. And I'm a beach guy. You know, my family calls me a fish. So I love to snorkel. So she writes, once a year, we hold a marine apprenticeship program which teaches local high school students 18 and up to be a part of a boat crew, the first step in making our yacht industry more local, and give our kids the opportunity to learn a new trade and start a lucrative career. There's a reason people move here in droves, which is to get into yachting. What other options are there for our youth in the territory? Is there a comprehensive list of young people, their parents, teachers, etc., so they can know what opportunities are out there, scholarships, apprenticeships, etc.? Thank you, Bridget. I'm gonna tell you why that struck a chord with me. Benny could probably attest to this too. When you grew up on the east end of the island, Freedom Hoy, Nazareth, going forward, you would look at the marina and these yachts, and in many ways, they were a psychological barrier, right? Because yachts and boating, that represents a certain high-end lifestyle, a certain upper echelon. And now as a man who is actually looking at some boats, I want to do the boat thing. That is so indicative of the two divides in our territory, where you have some young men who are so miserable and unhappy and frustrated that they're shooting each other in broad daylight. But there's folks on a yacht, because see, what people don't understand, the Virgin Islands, that little region, if you do your research, per capita, the wealthiest people in the world vacation and play in our islands. Yes, look it up, have fun. Epstein is a perfect example. So I like Bridget's, that apprenticeship program, because like we discussed, how can I tell a kid to be a scientist if he never met one? How can I tell a child to imagine greatness if they never see it nor feel it, if they're not connected to it? So I'm gonna go around the room and I want everyone to discuss an idea, an initiative on your heart and mind that you think could really at least put a dent. One senator told me, Peter, I don't think we're 20 years away from this ending this. Let me tell everybody something on this panel. I ain't about to wait 20 years. I don't want to see this next year. It's 100,000 people in our home. Nobody gonna tell me that we got to live through this on and on. And if that means we're gonna have to address the killers on their level, if that means we're gonna have to be at odds with them, they got to go. They got to go, because that could have been one of my loved ones. And this suit, it wouldn't have been a suit and tie type of day. So I'm gonna go on around the room, because I think we can all agree a lack of opportunity and access to success and an alternative means of attaining dreams is a big part of our problem here, lack of exposure. Lisa, what program, what initiative you think could address some of this instantaneously?
Okay, well, there's a lot of programs instilled in schools, like Boys and Girls Club, there's FBLA, there's FCCLA. Junior Statesmen of America was one of the programs that I was a part of, and that not only helps you address community topics, but also current events. And one of the things that stood out the most whilst I was a part of that program was violence and shootings and stuff like that. We got the opportunity to travel and compare the violence rate to other states. So I think that's a very good opportunity for the youth to join whilst they're in high school, so they can get a feel of everything happening around the world. So that's Junior Statesmen of America.
Kurt?
I think we do a disservice to the collective, and I'll get to that, but I will make a point, just with me to the point, right? I think we do a disservice to the collective when we talk about, or when we don't acknowledge the need for a political and spiritual revolution in the United States Virgin Islands, especially among the ancestral native people of the Virgin Islands that are, members of the African diaspora, as well as the Pan-Caribbean network, right? Talk a lot. Shalana made a really good point about identity. The senator made a really good point about laws and the code. If we can't make Virgin Islanders understand what our history is, that collective history, because St. Thomas, St. John, St. Croix have unique histories on their own, but then as a collective, right, we're a force to be reckoned with. Virgin Islanders aren't taught that history. We codify that Virgin Islands history should be taught from kindergarten to 12th grade, but it's not enforced. We codify that this and that and other need to be a part of the educational system, but it's not enforced. We have a law for a Cultural Heritage Institute, but there's no funding for a director, there's no funding for space to house our collective history or to tell this narrative. So codifying things is a step in the right direction as it seeks to facilitate this kind of activity, right? But then if we don't have visionary leaders, as the senator pointed out, in these positions where they're managing these spaces, right? Then we never get to a place of any substance. And so that becomes that becomes the system within which everybody else has to maneuver. If we don't have visionary leaders in our political system that facilitate the progression of a people, because we understand what that progression needs to look like, and we understand where we need to be trying to go, because we understand where we're coming from, right? If we don't have people managing these spaces, as the senator pointed out, and creating opportunity, everybody likes to talk about opportunity. People like to talk about funding, and people like to talk about access, but there has to be movement around these things. And there has to be people in spaces in capacity to create movement beyond the community moving in ways that they move to facilitate these things. The pastor talks about the church. which is significant. I grew up a Christian. I'm now spiritual. But even when we talk about faith, we have to talk about all the faiths, because my church might not be one that looks at the Bible and talks about Jesus Christ, the Savior. My church might be one that wants to lean more towards Yoruba traditions. And I talk about a babalawo, not a pastor. And I need my community to support me and moving in my church and in my spirituality as well, because that's a form of my identity. And I feel that as a member of the African diaspora, that's the identity that I want to speak to. And that's the space that I want to occupy my spiritual being, right? So all of these conversations about where to go and how to be, they have to come from a place of understanding who you are. We cannot move in any substantive way, but if we don't understand who we are as a people in our space, these three islands, in the Caribbean space, and then as members of a very deep global history, because we've had people from the Virgin Islands diaspora. Marcus Garvey was inspired by Hubert Harrison, a Virgin Islander. The Haitian Revolution was inspired by someone who left the Virgin Islands and went there and forced that movement. 1733 was the first successful slave revolt in the Western Hemisphere, in the New World. That happened on St. John. You were there with me. We had these conversations in that space, right?
It changed my life.
We have to talk about identity. You know, we had, Shalana pointed to elitism a while ago. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm going to be honest. As a St. Johnian who comes from the deepest of the deep families on this island, with roots back to the 1700s, the Marsh family has owned land on St. John since before emancipation. So that's well over 150 or so years. And now that site we visited, 1733, that fort is in a trust that is owned and operated by my family, the Samuels. I am an elitist, not among other Virgin Islanders, right? But to anybody who visits this space, you need to know that there are people here with a deep and beautiful and powerfully rich history, and you need to respect that. And I think a big part of our problem is we don't have a political system in place that bolsters the Virgin Islands people being who and how we need to be in this space, right? And so this brings us to the conversation about status. We got to talk about status. The senator said we got lazy, and she makes a very good point. We need to have a political revolution in the Virgin Islands where we talk about how we can decide who we're going to be. We sit and we wait for the federal government to give us pitons, right? Pitons to decide how we are going to be and who we are going to be and how we're going to move forward. 3 years after Maria, I worked in the Office of Disaster Recovery. We can't rebuild a school yet. We could look right next door to the BVI. They've rebuilt schools, they've rebuilt roads. Down the chain in Dominica, they've rebuilt neighborhoods. If we were able to self-determine, and if we were able to build networks, we could have been a part of a pan-Caribbean network that supports each other, right? But we're sitting here and we're denied the opportunity to connect with our neighbors in the region because we're waiting for the federal government to give us something. And the federal government has to decide if what we're asking for is valid enough for them to approve it, right? So all of these conversations have to go back to some sort of like very substantive discussion about Virgin Islands political status, and then conversations about that very deeply lost African spirituality, because the village don't raise the child no more. Dr. Shenzira pointed out in the last panel that we need to restore unity and loyalty to community. People in the Virgin Islands, by and large, are loyal to the capitalist, colonialist, neoliberal regime that is the American empire, right? The loyalty is to the dollar. It's not to your friends and your neighbors and your family anymore. So all these conversations have to go back to that space. It has to go back to that very critical space. I'll leave it there for now.
No, Kurt, that was we're gonna stay on that topic for a while because when I think of violence, when I think of young men shooting at each other as target practice, what goes through my mind is this. Okay, you have your enemy. Look, I'm no virgin to street life. I understand a lot of things about the world. I think about the mothers. Okay, if you hate that guy, fine. You hate his mother too? What did his mother do to you? And I say this point, Kurt, because you just moved me here. I would argue my parents moved to the Virgin Islands from Anguilla and Trinidad, what, the 60s, maybe, I think sometime around there. I would argue, don't get me wrong, if we were purchased in 1917, I think we really, this would be the generation, arguably, when the Virgin Islands begins to understand who it is. Because we're a new society, we're a hybrid society. And the topic of identity speaks to volumes. If a person doesn't know who they are, if they don't have a certain self-value, a self-pride that ties them to the person in their neighborhood, they don't mind killing that person. So from a very psychological point, I agree, Kurt, there needs to be a revolution of thoughts and ideals in our home. Because these young men, they're becoming caricatures. When I look at the average Virgin Islander, they don't know who they are. I just said a majority of these young men who were killed or murdering, killing people, all that's coming down their social media feed is stories about gangster disciples in Chicago. Chicago is how many thousands of miles away from our home? So our young people are trying to find an identity. They're searching for it. So in the lower income areas, they're identifying to those in pop culture who share a similar socioeconomic background, which is impoverished Black kids in Chicago, in South Central, hence why gangster rap is so popular with our kids. That's why we invited Kurt today. Shalana, speak to this. Speak to how do we get to the root of the problem? Because the question posed was programs that could get us out of this hunch, but we got to get to the root. So please elaborate more on the root and how do you think identity affects the low morale and self-esteem that leads to a society self-destructive?
I just want to also state it from what you just said with person's identity, talking about gang culture in the States. I just want to say Casper Holstein was one of the biggest gangsters in United States history, and he was a Virgin Islander, but he had a cause. So everything that he made, it went back towards bringing up African American culture and Caribbean culture. He made his money in playing susu, which is now lottery, and we have a Casper Holstein Drive here on St. Croix, and he gave back a lot to the Virgin Islands. He also helped erect a whole bunch of dorms and at Black institutions. So if you want to play gangster, you have to play for the right cause. You know what I mean? You don't bring down your own people. I just wanted to say that. Also, I am a certified teacher, although I am not teaching at this time. And I worked at alternative education as well as the youth rehabilitation program. And I just want to say, like, I don't think that those programs should mimic regular school, because when you are sent to these programs, because you couldn't function in a regular school atmosphere, you already identified that you have behavioral problems. You have a new track. Your track, you for most part, there are a minority that can go back, but for the most part, some of these people are students who have already committed murders, rapes, and potentially could harm people. And so what me and you see as a criminal as well, you gotta remember that a criminal in your eyes is somebody else's hero. We don't know why they did these atrocities. I already buried about 4 to 5 of my students this year, and the same boys who were in my classroom 2 years ago murdered each other this year. And they were in the same classroom together with desks right next to each other. So I think that for one day, the curriculum, once these students identify that we need to put them in a track where they can make money instantly, they're not going to be college bound. And so all those boys who were in that school, we were providing them with a regular education. They were never bound to do those kinds of stuff, to be in administration. So when they got out of those institutions, sometimes they didn't even make it to graduation. They just stopped coming. They led a life of crime because that was the next best thing. They know they don't have the book sense per se. And again, I will reiterate, that doesn't mean that you're dumb. It just means that those skills aren't per se for you. So once we identify those persons, we need to make sure, one, we have a big horse racing community here. We need to be sending those kids or bringing out institutions that could help in training horses. We have so many young men who went away and are at tracks training other horses and doing very well and send money back here for their families and so forth. Bridget talked about the marine programs and so forth. I also, because I know I have limited amount of time, I also want to say we just had a whole bunch of murders here on St. Croix, you know, and I went to one of my family members in Grove, and there were police cars aligned all around Grove. I thought that was a waste of time, because if we had put those same resources for giving police people, and again, I am the daughter of a policeman, so it's not that I don't want them to make money, into youth centers. If you already know atrocities happen in that neighborhood, instead of giving police personnel extra money, why don't you just have youth programs in every one of these places? I personally grew up in a housing community, but I grew up in town right next to Red Brick, Kennedy, Shabbat. So those are the people I played with. They had, when I was growing up, and that was like in the 80s and 90s, it had Steel Pan, it had Mokojumbi, and those programs came in. By the time I was in high school, those programs didn't exist anymore. And I don't know what happened now. I don't think that they exist at all anymore. I don't see any community centers anymore. I remember Shabert had a community center. As we know, that place is now shut down. I don't see any community centers in Kennedy. I don't see any community centers. I think Weed and Seed and Grove sometimes, if they get the money and the resources. So if we already identified that we found Liana Siru murdered in Grove Place, there is retaliation things going on in Grove Place, and you have police cars right now all around that place. How do you think the young people in that area feel? Like there's criminals. Instead of putting those resources towards police, those resources could be towards putting community centers. We need tech professionals, agriculturists, musical artists, artisans like Mr. Marsh, and we need to push athletes. How many of us are super athletes, but we don't get the opportunity to do anything? It's just, you don't hear about it if your father was a good basketball player. Your father was a good basketball player, but he never had the opportunity to go anywhere. We don't push it. The lights are on in many of the and those bar parks anymore right now. That's still.
Mm-hmm.
So you got play basketball by 6 o'clock before the light turn down. And when school start, how you gonna do that? Because you have to finish your school work by a certain amount of time. Now you really can't go and to do anything athletic. So I think we need to push our resources, and if once we identify people who are not academically inclined, we need to make sure that we push them into another genre of money making.
Thank you so much, Shalana. You're right. Over the course, even education professionals and scientists have proven that not everybody's academically inclined. And vocational programs, shop, mechanic, these different things, chefs, this is a lucrative trade that people will thrive. And you touched upon a point that even we used to have an anti-youth basketball league. Benny used to drive all of us around in his pickup truck. I remember being in the back of Benny's truck going to these games when, say, Bovoni and who were beefing back then? Bovoni and Ras Valley were beefing. Duno and Anos were beefing. Freedom Hall, we was always like a neutral, we were always like a cool, we was like a, we were respected, we was being our own, but my point is, we used to go to these different rival neighborhoods. And there's a guy by the name of Kaba, and I meant Kaba, I don't know if he's still alive, I hope he is, to give him my respect and honor, because I remember being a kid on Freedom Hall basketball court, and this guy used to have all of us playing basketball. Whatever little money he had, he'll take us to the games. It used to be his truck or Benny's truck. I don't see these programs anymore. I don't see these programs anymore. When I go home, I just see young men on the corner with absolutely nothing to do. I'm gonna bring up Kamal again, because I told you that young man struck a chord with me. I saw a young man with limitless potential. And when you have a gift and you have dreams and you know you're talented, there are some of us that know we're gifted, and you don't have an outlet to maximize that potential, it will drive you insane. To the truly gifted in our community who are not given a space to nurture and maximize that gift, that will drive you crazy. That is like greatness in a cave, in prison, it wants to scream, it wants to yell. And I think that is the story of so many of our young people. Senator Barnes, please elaborate on this issue, because
you chose a time. You chose a time when my dog is having a meltdown. Okay, I think he just got quiet.
Okay.
He's gonna call on me the moment my
Benny's about to go check on his dog. You see what you just did?
Yes. But listen, you know, I love this conversation. There are a couple of things, low-hanging fruit, and Shalana hit on some very key points. We have already had a roadmap as to what has worked in the past. Senator Jackson has an email hook line that I like. It says, go back and fetch it. And so basically, we need to go back and fetch it. If the recreational centers in our communities worked, I have cousins that grew up in Shabert that said the rec centers saved them. Let us put funding in reestablishing our recreational centers throughout the territory. That cannot be that difficult. That's one thing. Secondly, again, when I decided not to seek re-election, I spoke to the issue of a lack of representative government. We have a system in place right now where everyone is all the senators are representing everyone, but no one is accountable to anyone. We need sub-districting. We need constituent-based representation where elected officials can be held accountable for a specific constituency, where our elected officials are not running against each other and competing, so that when they get into a body, they are complementing each other. So then that would speak to a greater degree of representative government, accountability, and responsiveness to the needs of your constituents. If we had sub-districting, whomever senator represented the Mambuju area or the Grove area, they would be directly looked to begin to bring some degree of resolution to some of these issues that we are having. But right now, like I said, with this at large, everyone represents everyone and no one is accountable to anyone. So it breeds competition instead of collaboration, and instead of persons complementing each other. And that to me breeds inefficiency and ineffectiveness, So until we begin to address our political evolution, we are going to be forever faced with these challenges. So I touched on the politics, the political evolution. I touched on the issues relative to community centers. Something that we've spoken little of tonight, education. We have to truly have culturally relevant education from kindergarten to 12th grade, where we speak to those things that Shalana speaks about and Mr. Moss spoke about when it comes to talking about identity, knowing who we are, having that degree of pride. One of the things that I experienced when I went to Hampton University, they said all of the students from the Virgin Islands, you came onto this campus with such a degree of confidence and pride. I mean, we owned the yard. We knew who we were. We came from an environment where our governor was Black, our Congress, well, at the time it was Randy Lugos. Okay, so God rest his soul. We came from a point where we had our elected officials were Black. Our commissioners were Black. So we had that sense of pride. We still have it now, but we are failing ourselves because we have failed to evolve. We got to a specific point. Okay, we're middle class now. We ain't walking in the field no more. So we have arrived and we thought that was it, when an agrarian culture and being self-sustaining was more progressive than an office job, where entrepreneurship is more sustaining than working 30 years for the government and arguing with GRS for your annuity. So we have to go back to some fundamentals, but to me, it's not that difficult because we have a framework of what worked in the past. Our young men were taught a trade. Every young man was taught a trade. Every young lady was taught some sort of domesticated skill or whatever homemaking that we frown on. But that is the beginning of an entrepreneurial mindset. So we have to begin to re-educate our young people to have a mindset of independence, of being self-sustaining, and it is rooted in a vision, an identity, and pride. So we have to first, and just because I know my time is limited, we have to say, this is who we are as a people, and this is where we endeavor to go. And then this is what we have to do in our education system to get there. This is what we have to do with our banking regulations to get there. This is what we have to do politically to get there. This is what we have to do socioeconomically to get there. But this fragmented, siloed, haphazard, everybody in their own little fiefdom doing what they think is a good idea is getting us nowhere fast. We are in crisis. We have to put the brakes. We have to draw a line and we have to say, this is not working. And we need to look at what has worked for us as a people in the past, apply it, make it relevant to today's environment, and then move forward. But if we continue where in this trend, my heart breaks for the Virgin Islands. My heart breaks for St. Croix. When I drive around St. Croix, it looks like a third world country. It's like we're going backwards. We are better than we have allowed ourselves to become. And we have accepted mediocrity as the norm. We should not be going to a hospital where there's an outhouse in the emergency room for a bathroom. We should not be driving on roads that have potholes the size of craters. These are things that we are accepting. My daughter should not have gone to a high school with grass so high that it's reaching up to the children's waist. This is unacceptable. It shows a lack of self-pride, a lack of love. And so this self-hate that is permeating through this community and all levels, we need to recognize it. We need to call it what it is. We need to eradicate it. And we need to take the requisite steps to become who we truly are. And Shalana, in closing, spoke about Caspar Holseed. He was a gangster. He wasn't a thug. And our young men need to know the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Your
Thank
poetry
you.
made me reflect on something. You're right.
Now,
Then
can I?
yes. Who? Kurt, you speaking? Yeah, go.
I just wanted, since Shalana mentioned the trades and Senator Barnes did also, I just wanted to also mention that I have experience there because when I first moved home in 2016, I moved home to teach industrial arts, which at Julius Sprouse School, the one public school on St. John, the program had been shuttered for 8 or so years since my uncle had retired, my uncle who taught me. So in my learning from him, this traditional.
And not even Kurt, but your uncle, I met him. He's one of like the world's renowned in woodworking.
In wood turning, yeah.
In the world. There you go.
In the world, right. So having the experience of being able to learn that trade in his class, and when I went through Julius Sprouse School, we had home ec, we had business, we had industrial arts, we had computer science, we had FPLA, SCCLA, so there were the programs in school, but then there were also the clubs that students could join and all the sports teams outside of school. So there was a very good network and communication between what was happening on campus and what was also happening off campus, right, and after school. And I wanted to say, there was a person who, because I'm looking at the Facebook thread also and reading some.
Yeah, I'm looking at the questions, the comments myself. Yeah.
There's a person who mentioned we were getting off topic. And so I just wanted to make the point, right, that these things are all so very relative,
all of it,
and relevant.
It's on topic.
We don't talk about, well, but just to clarify for the individual,
gotta
right?
get to the root. We're getting to the root.
If we don't talk about like this collective effort, right, to address the issue of identity, which permeates our politics, it permeates our priorities individually, it permeates our priorities as a community, and it informs what we do and how, right? If we don't address these very deeply rooted issues about identity and status and all of that, we could never properly address anything else. So to that person who mentioned that, I hope that as we continue to discuss this, you start to understand how all these things are tangential.
The lack of identity leads to self-hate. Self-hate leads to me not liking me, so me not liking you, and you end up dead, cold, and crumpled in the concrete.
So me not liking you.
That's simple. In our previous town hall, I've seen a pattern here. The theme, everybody in the previous town hall kept coming back to this point of community. We have no community. It's fragmented. Everyone is in their silos. Another person touched on these parks and the dilapidated conditions our park system is in. The young man, Kerwin Williams, in the first town hall said, what do you expect if you go to a park and there's no swings for the kids to sit on? So there's a common thread here of basically, I don't know, there's a common thread here. And I want to touch on something that you guys just educated me on, this Casper individual. 100,000 square miles. A buddy of mine said, I used to stay, man, we from this little dot. And that used to make me have a inferiority complex. Lloyd Maynard, he said, but Peter, of all the places in the world you could have been chosen to be on, how did you end up on this little rock? I said, wow, that's something magical. So let me continue. Denmark Vesey, one of the greatest rebellion leaders basically a former slave that led rebellions in Charleston. The guy that shot up the church in Charleston, Dylan Roof, it was in defiance of Denmark Vesey, who was a Centomian. Okay. Edward Blyden, the father of Pan-Africanism, who inspired the teachings of Garvey and all these guys. Edward Blyden, another Virgin Islander. When I went to Fort Burr and I marched up that hill and I realized that the Haiti Revolution was the most popularized one, yes. We had the first. Please, somebody explain to me why, from a tourism aspect, from whatever aspect, why is this history, this monument, not bellowing from around the world? Where people from around the
Where's
world.
the monument?
I'm just,
Where's the toll?
or identify, because I'm just saying from a simplistic value, let's break it down to layman terms.
Peter, can I just add, oh, sorry.
Interjection.
Yeah,
I'm gonna forget real quick.
You hit a relevant point.
Sure.
But then, you know, you hit a very important point. But if we haven't determined what message we want to communicate, then how do we know what to do? I took my daughter and my mom to Montego Bay in 2018 after the primary election. And as you get off the plane and you enter the terminal, right?
They let you know in Jamaica. They let you know.
It is lined with Jamaica's national
With
youth.
Bustamante, with everybody. Yeah.
Bustamante, Manley, Bob, I mean, it's lined, okay? And so you just get that sense of national pride before you even leave the airport.
Yep.
Why is it at our airport area, the baggage area, you seeing perfume, Cardo, you seeing Sonia's bracelet, you seeing, I mean, like, give me a break. I mean, we have such a rich history. I mean, Senator Jackson has spoken to this. I think there's even legislation that was passed that speaks to this. We have such a rich history. Why can't it be that as you come off the plane, that not only tourists, but our students alike, as we go back and forth, we are reminded visually on a daily basis who we are. I mean, we are awesome. We are an awesome people. And we really need to know who we are, and that we don't need someone to come in and save us. We can save ourselves. We just need to know who we are. It's very simple.
Fully agree. I'm gonna pass it over to Pastor Monroe. Pastor, in the march with the mothers, and I am so in awe of the mothers that marched against gun violence. I think the education of a society begins in a mother's womb. So I think women, if you look at a weak society, if you look at a society that's eroding at itself, it probably doesn't have strong women. And the Virgin Islands are known for strong women. I mean, Queen Mary led our revolts. Pastor, you said something on the March and Waterfront that reminded me of an incident that happened in St. John. A couple of years ago, I was at the carnival, and I was with a partner of mine from St. John, Travis, that I went to Udurkin with. And these two kids, they were fighting. And it's like they wanted to kill each other. And I said, Travis, they still doing this, what we used to do as kids? He said, yeah, that ain't gonna stop. And what I looked at, these kids are fighting on Cruise Bay, which in my opinion is like magical. And my mind is, why are our kids adopted a ghetto prison in their mind and they're not seeing this beauty that billionaires like Epstein and all these guys spend their whole lives trying to amass wealth to live where we began life? I repeat, the wealthiest people on this planet spend their lives amassing wealth to eventually take up residence to where we were blessed to begin. Pastor, speak to the poison of the mind, the lack of self-worth that ties to identity that's leading to the carnage of gun violence.
Yeah, I think that Kurt and the rest of the speakers before me touch on it. We're not off topic. We are on topic as much as we can be on topic. You know, listen, I grew up poor, grew up in the projects. Again, I just had the fortune to born in St. Croix, grew up in St. Thomas, kind of get the two worlds, love St. John. Mm-hmm. But you know, even when I was growing up, I was trying to figure out, what does the larger world mean to me? And I think that I had good people around me. I was on St. Thomas, and I used to, you know, bathe horse, walk horse after school, because then, you know, we live in Estate Bovoni. Even now, my mom still live in Estate Bovoni. And just being able to be around horses, kind of released me from the mundane things of just going to school, coming back, playing in the school band. going to church, you know, playing in the neighborhood, playing basketball. But people showed me that there's more to me, and I can do anything if I put my mind to it. But I had the great influences around us. So at the march, we stopped on the waterfront where you had the prison, then you had the Randy Lugo courtroom, and then you had the ocean. And I said to everyone, here is a crossroad in the Virgin Islands. Our young people sometimes have to go up to a prison cell to look over to see the beauty of a tranquil waterfront, which we have the best in the world. And the courthouse next to you, that is built so that they're going to put you in jail. My thing was that, why don't we remain free to enjoy the beautiful waters that we have, the beautiful island that we have? So I think it goes back to the identity issue, and school has to do more. I learned more just listening to everyone today than I learned from history in school just tonight, just collectively. And that should not have been. And we have been really saying to the school that from Joseph Gomez Elementary School, yes, we had home economics, went over to BCB, went over to Dorican. Yes, you had snippets of all those things. I learned how to type because I took up a class in Dorican called typing. Could you believe that? One of my teachers told me that in a couple of years, the computer is going to practically take over the world, so you have to learn to type. But he was saying that to me, and we were actually listening to them. So I don't know if it's self-hatred, but I do know lack of opportunities and lack of influences and also lack of exposure, even on the island, it is a problem. And I hope that we can get to that point. I also want to go back to say as well, when I talk about the faith community, I'm talking holistically. And I know that Peter did use the word church, but just so that everyone who is listening, I am holding the responsibility of our faith community, whether you go to a temple, a mosque, a synagogue. The faith community has a specific role in all of it. And the faith community as well have to teach our spirituality of who we are, the color of our skin, not just the idea of a white Jesus, but the idea of a liberated person who really helped to free our mindset. So I think that, again, even in the houses of worship or in our faith community, is going to complement what we learn in school and the Virgin Island history that we have. So I am hoping that we take a holistic approach to this crime and the violence. We have to do all of this at the same time. We cannot afford to just do one thing. I know that I see a lot of people here posting about programs. Yes, you want to support programs, but we need a comprehensive plan that includes all of the programs, all of the Department of Education. It is not just one thing. One person saying, what are we going to do to stop the killing right now? What are we going to do? We have to do all that we can do. It's not just one thing that we can do. Yes, the police department would need to do what they have to do, but we also have to educate and save children now. So in the next 10 years, we don't raise up a new set of killers on the street of the Virgin Islands. So what we're doing now is that we're having the conversation, but we actually put in inspiration in people who will listen to us right now, who might have an idea that they can bring it forward, who might have a business idea that they might start the business that will take them off the unemployment line and put them towards success. So as we speak, we are saying that in the atmosphere that it is being released so that people can make a change and we can encourage someone who's listening to us right now. I don't know if a gangbanger, quote unquote, I don't know if there's a posse listening to us in Mitchell Holmes or wherever in St. Croix, St. John or St. Thomas. We don't know who's listening to who. But what we do know is that what these young men can see, I don't think that they can see us in them. We have their same story. We grew up in the same area. We play ball the same way that they play ball. We went to their same school. Our parents live together right now together. So I think that we're not tuned out, but I think that if they realize that, look who you have on the panel, everyone talk about their upbringing. We are all from the same place. And we consistently think that we can do better. We want to give the Virgin Island hope. This panel is about hope, it's about aspiration, it's about what we can be. And you are seeing it live and direct. No one is telling you what you can be. We are saying that we are you, and we want you to believe that you can be us too.
Very well said, Pastor. Very well said. You're right. Everybody's on the internet, and we're planting seeds. We're planting seeds. Benny, you have the floor. One of your mind can really address this instantaneously.
Well, for me, you know, my background is sports and entertainment. So what I've seen there's a big lack of every time I come home now is no more summer basketball, man league, no more inter-neighborhood leagues going on, no more Thanksgiving tournament, no more King of the Hill up in Tonki. You know, a lot of these things that I was involved in while I was coming up to be able to help shape me to the person that I am today are no longer. Now, what I am seeing from a lot of people online is a lot of, yeah, but we need this. Yeah, you're not doing this. Can we do this? Where's somebody to do this? Listen, peoples and everybody that's watching us on this panel right now. We are not your leader. We are not. We are just people just like you with opinions. And we, just like you, would like to see a change and better in Virgin Islands. So if you have an idea of something that's needed, someone just commented and said we need to have masons and plumbers and all of that. We need all that type of stuff. Hey, why don't you create a Facebook page and say plumbers, masons, carpenters, chefs, boatman them are all needed. DM me, sign up, and then you can start your own program. Again, we need to stop thinking or depending on just government or on a supposed leader. No disrespect to Pastor Gill, but we can't always just look to your pastor every Sunday, okay? Sometimes we have to get up off our butts and get out there and do something for ourselves. Start to make it happen. If you see that there's something lacking, create it. There's nothing wrong with you creating it. And if you feel you can get the message out to people in the proper manner that you want to see it in, then team up with someone else. Find like-minded people within your community and within your neighborhoods and within your island to start creating these programs that you are not seeing for yourselves. If you're not seeing it and it's a lack, create it. It's too many times we get so complacent with just blaming this or blaming that. I love what Alicia said with zoning. I've always talked about zoning or asked about zoning. Our senators are not able to be held accountable in no way because there's no finger to point to say, well, this is your district. So we need for you to be able to handle as an elected official to be able to handle this type of thing or join in with this movement that we're having within this district. There's none of that, right? So if we don't have those type of things, then I think people need to start really being much more self-sufficient and getting things done for themselves. Find your like-minded people and start to create things or just create it on your own. I didn't wait for my friends who told me my kickball event during Carnival was the most stupidest idea they ever heard in life. I decided this is something I feel is lacking during our Carnival time, something outside of just the soca and whatever else that was going on, some form of entertainment, group activity, and I created it. It started out with about 30 people spectating, to now we have hundreds of people coming out to spectate the event and people looking forward to either spectating or participating in the game. You see what I'm saying? So we have to start getting out of this thing of just blaming this person or that person, and we have to start doing it for ourselves. If we feel like there's like with the amount of gun violence that's going on in the communities, then a few of us need to say we're going to group up and go through the community. The community is so small, you know who's doing what. So let's go and have a conversation with these people. Sometimes we find ourselves saying that, oh, we're so scared and we're so afraid to have a conversation with this person. Just like how the young lady spoke and said she taught these students and they sat next to each other in her classroom. That lets me to know that you have a level of respect and rapport with these kids or young adults now, that you can say, man, oh, I'm hearing this person is doing such and such and such. I need to go into that neighborhood and have a conversation with them because I know at some point they're going to listen to me or at least respect me enough to hear me out. So we have to be able to get to those points. All right. So people like myself, people like Peter, people like Pastor Gill, people like the senator, we can only do but so much. We need the help of the community. I see a guy was on here saying he don't know not one of us on the panel for being in the streets. There's real true guys that should be on the panel. And I'm like, man, listen, it's not even about that. It really is because now come to find out, he lives at St. Croix. I from St. Thomas, I live in Atlanta. So there was no way for us to have crossed paths before. But now through this discussion, we can now link up and say, hey, we're both for a common cause. We're both here on the same goal, the same path. We live on different islands or we live in different states or whatever the case is. But let's come together now and create something that we can go and make a difference in our communities that we were raised in. You see what I'm saying? But if we keep pointing fingers or we're not willing to get up and do things, then it's always going to be, once again, the recycled cycle. I have friends who commend me for times that they remember when I came to them on their turf. I came to the turf in housing, in ghettos, in Bovoni, in Freedom Hall, in Ras Valley, in Tonki. I came to the turf to have conversations with the guys. When I have my actor friends or musician friends come to St. Thomas, I brought them in the hoods because I understood, coming from Freedom Hall and Anna's Retreat and Bovoni, there are people that needs to be reached that are not leaving their comfort zone. I understood that. So I made sure now that I'm in a position where I can have these type of friends, I'm going to bring them to these people and show them, hey, this is real. The one time that I brought Ving Rhames, the actor Ving Rhames, to the Virgin Islands, I brought him into ghettos, I brought him to Round the Field. When I brought him to Round the Field, some of the kids were like, man, I just watched a movie with him. Now they understand it's real. I seen this guy in the theater, on TV, in a movie, and now he's right here, standing or sitting next to me, giving me the same jewels that people like Benny D have said, people like Peter have said, people like my teachers have said, the same jewels, but now they receive it much better from this person that they looked up to. You see what I'm saying? So again, it takes the help and the understanding from everyone, not just us who's on this panel right now. We, again, are not your leaders. You are the leader of your own domain. Get up off of your butts and do something, peoples. If you're on this thing right now and you're watching us, that means you have access to us. We're in a social media world. You have access to me. It's nothing but a DM. Send me a direct message. Benny, this is what I'm looking to do. I need your level of celebrity to come in and help with this. I understand for any of the teachers who know me from coming to their schools and talking to the kids as I've done, they would reach out and they would say, Benny, they're not hearing it from me, but here's what I'm saying to them, X, Y, Z. Okay, cool, I got you. When I come to the school, I'm saying the exact same thing that the teacher told them, that your parent told them. but because I am who I am and they look up to me in some particular way and they respect me in some particular way, they receive it much better. This is why we all work together. Same thing for the pastor. If the pastor is trying to get his word out, he's seen that traditionally, the way that the church has gone, people are not receiving that anymore. So he had to change the way he spreads his word. You see what I'm saying? He may end up going out to the streets and conquering his thing in that way, instead of just in the church and expecting people to only come there on Sunday. And if you come, you come. If you don't, well, that's your business. He's understood that his word is much more important for him to be able to get it out there. So he's figured out a new way to be able to reach people than the traditional way in which he has seen is no longer working. Same thing with people, teachers in the classrooms. There's a reason why some teachers are liked more than other teachers. That's because those teachers have figured out new ways to be able to reach the kids that they're teaching. So that's all it is. We just have to figure out new ways and everybody stay involved. Once again, I want to say sports, entertainment, arts, these are things that teach grouping. In sports, you have to learn how to get along with different people to be able to win a game. Whether it's volleyball, basketball, baseball, whichever it is, soccer, whichever it is, cricket, you have to be able to play a team sport. So within that in itself, it teaches you how to communicate with your peers. It teaches you how to be able to get to the same common goal together. These are things that we need for these young people in our communities to be able to keep them involved, keep them open in their minds, and just keep everything going. So that's my take.
I agree. That was powerful. Senator Barnes, I'm gonna call on you 1 second. I had something in my mind and I lost my train of thought. Yes, I'm looking at the comments too, and what should I do? I was looking at the comments and the emails I received, which says, "Well, we're doing this program, this town hall." When I thought of this concept, was to bring all of us together. I believe that we got to get back to the collective community. And like Benny said, if you have an idea, it's not that your idea is too small. And don't look at the people whose idea are being pushed in the forefront. Yours can add too. But we can't be a community. A car can't have 5 different steering wheels. We're not going to get in one direction. So to join collectively, the purpose of this is to bring all these voices, bring your suggestions, and we as a people decide, okay, we're going to move this way. Well, this program is working right now. Let's move this way. So I think we keep getting back to community, sense of self. You could be a hero on your block. Senator Barnes, your hand's been raised for a minute. So yes, you have the floor.
You know, and I would love to hear from Lisa because she made some very good points earlier in terms of her perspective. And, you know, she reminded me so much of what my daughter has stated, even in terms of, you don't even want to feel like bothering to go out anymore because, you know, it's always some incident, you know. But, you know, Benny said a word that we haven't used much tonight. And it's important, and it's respect. And one of the things that I have learned as an elected official is to respect the streets and to listen to what the streets, what the street has to say. And we have this issue of gun violence right now. And we have our young Black and brown men and women dying on the streets. Have we made a determination to have a discussion with the streets? Have we even began to identify every domain has a leader or leaders? Have we identified who those leaders are? And have we begun to have a discussion in earnest in that regard? That's where the problem is. So let's hear what's actually happening.
It's interesting.
The other day on St. Croix, we had an issue with the bush races for the Hasmandan, okay? And I heard the pastor talk about horse racing and what that did for him, okay? And we pretty much interrupted something that was working well. And persons say it was illegal. I just say it was unofficial, okay? We had unofficial horse racing in the bush, but it was working. And traditionally in the Virgin Islands, from the beginning of time, we've had bush racing. I was looking at some medieval show on Netflix. They had bush races. It's just something that happens. And so here it is. This is a system in place that is bringing our young Black and brown men together and giving them an outlet. And it may not be official, it was unofficial, but it was working and it was an outlet, because we don't have horse racing. Cockfighting is banned. We don't have car racing. We don't have the recreational intra or inter neighborhood leagues. Where is the outlet? Where is the outlet for our children? And we sit here and we're so surprised that all of these things are happening on the streets. I mean, slap us a couple of times. I mean, give me a break. We have created this environment and now we're shocked. No, we need to now figure out how we got here and put things back in place to get us out of this mess. And obviously there's something happening in the streets right now. Like you hear them say the streets are hot. Well, then we need to have a discussion with the streets. If we're gonna be real, And so I believe a lot of that, a lot of the comments are speaking to that. And I keep it real, I'm authentic, so we have to be able to go to the source, and we have to respect the streets, and we have to find out what's going on and then come with a path forward, because we're going to need the involvement of the streets as well to address this problem.
And on that topic, I've spoken to several young men who are involved in these activities and a couple of Virgin Islanders who are incarcerated. And we plan to have a town hall with them. Because yes, we need to speak to the streets. But I will say, the streets need to understand the streets though. And I will say, what we see going on in the Virgin Islands, I'm just going to be a little bit real here. This concept of gangster, I don't know if some of these young men really understood what it means, the historical significance and what defines it, right? So we're going to have that discussion. Some of what we're seeing is, quite sadly, is just a culture of violence, where you see some of these kids think it's cool. Some of these kids really, some of these young men have, I don't know, it's layers. But we are 2 hours in. I said that when we have these town halls, Senator, I told you that the time goes. But like we say in the island, sometimes you have to wrap it up while it's sweet, sweet, sweet. So having said that, there's a comment that stuck with me that I read through all the comments that it hit me like a hurricane. The comment was, well, if we have all these programs, how are we sure we're going to get the parents to take their kids to? And I'm going to say why that struck with me. I went to an MLK basketball tournament several years ago at Eudorica. There were no parents there. It was just a bunch of kids. So like Benny said earlier, this is a community effort. We are as strong as our weakest link. We tend to like to point fingers a lot. It's going to take a comprehensive community approach. Because if you don't value your child enough, see, I had this wild idea, and then my mother said, son, I don't know if that's too controversial. Should these parents be charged? If your child is running through the Virgin Islands wreaking havoc on people, you know what your child is doing. He comes home, he sleeps in your house. So where is the weight of the responsibility on the parent? Because you're raising these children. So where are the parents? They see what's going on. They live with these young men. I'm going to leave that there. And as usual with our town hall, we're going to go around the group and to offer your last words. So we're going to begin with, this time, last words. We're going to begin with Senator Barnes, your outtake, per se.
Well, I want to leave on a high note. I believe that we're going through a renaissance in the Virgin Islands, and I know specifically on St. Croix, it's a Crucian renaissance in terms of just a new awareness, just Crucian pride. You know, when you see persons like Shalana, the millennials are just doing it. I mean, there is just this resurgence in our culture, our music, our cuisine, you know, all things cultural. So notwithstanding what we're discussing here today, and the discussion must be had, and I do believe we came up with some low-hanging fruit things that we can do immediately to begin to address this issue. I don't want the positive things that are happening to be lost in this discussion, because we are a mighty people. And in the midst of all of our challenges, we are resilient, and we are going to be able to overcome this particular obstacle, because we have to recognize we have gone through 2 categories, 5 storms, and we're dealing with a pandemic that has impacted just the mental health collectively of this community. And much of what is being manifested as well has to do with our emotional and mental well-being, or lack thereof, at this point in time. I swear, I told my daughter, I'm going to go and get some counseling, because it is a lot that we've been dealing with for a sustained period of time. But I want to leave on a high note, stating that we are a mighty people. We are resilient, and the power to change our world is inside of us. And if we can imagine a thing, God has now equipped us with the ability to bring it to pass. So we need to be able to imagine the great possibilities of who we can be individually and who we can be collectively. And when I see persons like Shalana, when I hear Lisa speak, when I hear Kurt speak, I am encouraged and I am hopeful that we are going to turn things around, that we do have a bright future, and collectively we need to catch the vision of this renaissance and then work towards getting there. And I endeavor to do my part as an active citizen of this community, notwithstanding the fact that I decided not to seek re-election to the legislature. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share, and just commend the panelists. This has been very inspiring for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barnes. Benny, last words?
I just want to say that as a community, we should all want to be involved in trying to help get our community to higher standards. We should want better for ourselves. As parents, we should want to see the best for our kids. I do my part. I do whatever I can. I do as much as I can. We always could do more, but for as busy as I am, I still do as much as I can for the Virgin Islands, So I always feel like if I can take my time out of my busy schedule that I have created for my career and still instill myself into the Virgin Islands and do as much as I can for it, then I think the people that's there and living there can be able to do the same also. Don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to team up. And let's do what we can to be able to get this gun violence down, get it to a stop. And, we just have to want more from our community.
Thank you. Lisa J.
Okay, listening to the last takes and previous discussion, I do agree with everyone, especially Barnes. But one point I want to kind of touch is that majority of the killings that takes place on St. Thomas is not due to being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Our young men are being shot by people that they knew or grew up with. And yes, I agree that the lack of opportunity and not being familiar with your roots and history has a part to play, but exposure to guns as a child also has a part to play, as well as broken homes. I think broken homes especially causes young teens, especially boys, to stray away from home and force themselves to find love elsewhere. And sadly, they tend to find love in the streets, but in reality, the streets don't love you. They try to fit in. And I think that is a root cause of today's gun violence. When I say it starts at home, it doesn't necessarily have to be poor parenthood and not disciplining your child, but it's also how you discipline your child, and if you're disciplining your child the right way. I feel kicking them out of the house and putting them on blast for the neighboring friends to hear, I think that more tampers with the child's self-esteem. And there are ways that you as a parent can harmlessly correct and teach your child to love and respect others. And you want to raise a son or a daughter that becomes a strong man or woman of wisdom, a leader and positive representation of the Virgin Islands. And that's my take on that.
I want to put you on the spot, Lisa, and let everybody hear that beautiful voice.
Wow.
Why not? Give us 10 seconds. Come on. This is a town hall for the community. We want to hear our people's talent. Give it to us. I've heard you sing. Give us something.
Okay, what song would you like to request?
Whatever you want to sing.
At least give me a little idea.
Whatever you feel is right for this conversation. That's uplifting, that's inspiring, that's positive, that anything you feel that's right for this occasion.
Thinking. You're gonna have to come back on that. I'm still thinking.
I'm gonna come back to you. You're gonna close it out. You're gonna close it out with a little song, okay? So
Gotcha.
get ready. Kurt, the man of the hour, that took us down the soul-searching route in the conversation. Last words.
I hope I touched your soul.
You did. You did, my brother. You did.
I want to sort of piggyback on some of the positivity that the senator was trying to bring back to this space, right? Include, because I think this is a really important and critical space as we have this conversation. But it also needs to be one that's real and critical, but it also needs to be one that's empowering and uplifting. So I think I agree with many people that while the government should not be the space we look to answer all our questions, even in the structure as it is, as a colonial government and with the lack of proper representation and all these things, we can look to our government to play a very active role in empowering, especially community groups that are already doing very important work through sometimes very simple means of support. Sometimes a nonprofit needs a space. The government has abandoned properties across the territory. Lease the space at a decent rate to a nonprofit that they don't have to worry about real estate, that they could focus on programming, they could focus on renovating that space that's already built. They could focus on what's important, right? So the government in many cases, we don't need the government to give the money, but give what you can give. And a lot of times that's space, right? These nonprofits do a very, very good job at finding resources, applying for grants, getting grants. And as far as we all know, managing those grants is something they do a lot of times much better than the government too. So we shouldn't look to the government to give us all that we need, but we should look to the government to give us what they can give. And in many cases, that's getting out of the way, right? I want to also make the point that this renaissance that we're experiencing, I think, is because people of a certain generation in the territory right now, people like Shalana, myself, Benny in his space, Lisa, Peter, we all came up in our Virgin Islands that was looking to a future, but also carrying the past, right? And so I think this renaissance is because of the fact that we hold that there. We hold that on a deeply spiritually rooted plane, right? And so we see that past that we've been holding on to slipping from our grasp. And so we want to reclaim it. Like the senator says, Senator Jackson in his signature, go back and bring it forward. We see that, we grew up in it, we appreciate it, we understand it, we respect it, and we want to reclaim it. A big part of this exercise in identity and all of that has to do with reclaiming narratives, right? And so we have to reclaim the narrative. And the renaissance is happening as it is right now because we understand that narrative. We have a disconnect between intergeneration, across generations, right? Between young and old, but then there's also a disconnect right now horizontally with generations. So we start to go back to building communities, start to go back to educating each other and looking out for each other, because at the end of it, it boils down to what our priorities are, how we collectively plan for those priorities and address those priorities and support those priorities, right? And then how we bolster each other throughout that process. So I think as we continue to figure this out, because we're figuring it out, as we continue to figure this out, we need to support each other in all these spaces as we move through these spaces. And then, like Benny said earlier, do your part. On St. John, we have plenty nonprofits, but we don't have any that advocate for and work for the ancestral native people of St. John. And so myself and some peers of mine, we started a nonprofit. It's called St. John Go, the St. John Heritage Collective. And at our core, we seek to preserve the identities, culture, and history of the people of St. John. And our focus is on pre-park, which would be 1956 persons, or pre-purchase, which would be 1917. So we have decided that we can do something about what we see, and we organized around that collective idea and vision, right? But again, we're in a position where we're asking the government for property because we don't need money, we need space, because we have people that would fund our initiatives if we had a space. And so if people who are in government capacity need to understand the role that they can play also in this collective exercise, right? So if property and procurement, if we come to you with a property and say this building been abandoned for 10 years, let's come to a lease, give us the property, let's get our programming happening. So beyond the community trying to do it on their own, our government needs to figure out how we can support all these things that need to happen. But again, it's a conversation about identity and priorities, and all of that needs to come from a very deep space. And I think this renaissance across the territory is going to help us get there. Thanks, Peter, for the invite, and thanks everyone else for this dialogue.
Well said. Shalana?
Yes, true. Thank you, Mr. Marsh, and thank you again, Mr. Peter Bailey, for the invite. Again, culture and identity is very important to me. I will reiterate, before I came to this conversation, it was something that I spoke about with many persons and even young persons that were in my classroom. And elitism, again, colonialism and capitalism and individual worth. Again, we are one person, we are one community. So if you're in an economic status, again, it affects everybody. Colonialism, again, because loss of identity, and capitalism, where we value things more than people. Again, I'm going to talk about programs. I do know that the Momiju Recreational Center, I have to give much kudos to them for, they have the YGT band with awesome young people that know how to play musical instruments, and they promote singing and the arts. That is a community which I had grew up in. Once again, I did not grow up in a in a housing community, but I grew up around it, and I was able to take part in learning how to do mokojumbi. I learned fine arts, and all around those communities, Shabert, Kennedy, Red Brick, Bazin, which I grew up near, they all had programs, and after homework or even before we got home, we were engaged in it. We didn't have time to actually be in problems. That means we were actually really seeking it out, because we were so encapsulated in our art that we wanted to do. We wanted to be the best mokojumbi, we wanted to be the best dancer, and we wanted to play the steel pan the best. We wanted to be the best Anansi storyteller. And I pray for the young men. Again, Benny D was talking about it, and also our Senator, Ms. Barnes, about talking to young men on the street. And I live in the Sign Farm area, and as we know, the Sign Farm area is very hot right now. And I just said prayers for them. I know I can't talk about telling the police how to police, but just remember that do not use victims to help you in your policing, because victims are such. They're not to be what you call, I wrote it down, playing chess with our children. So do not use persons to close small cases when they're larger cases to close, because all you're actually doing is endangering young people. And that's all I have to really say about that. I know you guys could read into that. And again, elitism, colonialism, and capitalism, and culture and identity is very important if we have to move forward.
Thank you so much, Shimon. Pastor Monroe.
Yeah, thank you again, Peter and everyone. I just want to close by saying that every loss of life that happens in the Virgin Islands, every young Black individual who died, again, it pains my heart, because that could have been me. That could be one of my cousins, my brother, my sister, on island. So my prayers are always for the Virgin Islands. It's always for young men, especially, that, kings, we want all kings to live. I would also say that I commend Senator Barnes for actually not seeking re-election. So that takes a level of courage. And two senators who have been mentioned tonight, both of them are not seeking re-election, Senator Barnes and Senator Myra Jackson. So I think that's also good too as well. That is refreshing. I don't know how much credit you're going to get for saying that, but I trust and pray that wherever God leads you to, that we will never lose your voice, and that you'll be a very strong advocate for us moving forward. And just in closing, what I would say is that what you see here tonight is really what it takes to create the Virgin Islands that everyone should grow up and thrive to live. It takes artists, it takes singers, it takes elected officials, it takes journalists, it takes musicians. It takes all of us. And someone said today about, so you're marching, what would that solve? we don't have to down, you know, any one of the activities that is being done. If marching is your thing, we want to support the marching because it highlights the problem and you see visibly. If you're doing something with sports, do sports. Don't tell the person who is doing music that they shouldn't be doing music. My thing is that VI, we just need to be able to come together. And I want to leave on a positive note. I am refreshed to see how much people are in the struggle for the good and fighting for the soul of the Virgin Islands. We're in a fight for our very lives. And I think that with all of us collectively, I feel that we can do it. It's not going to take a one-prong approach. Your one program that you think is the best program is not enough. All of us must be on the same sheet of music. And I think that tonight it proves that you probably don't know me and I probably don't know you, but I guarantee you, I had a gun in my hand growing up. And so the people know me, say to me, wow, I can't believe you used to be over here, grew up in Tutu, and now you're a pastor. They're amazed. They're amazed to see the person that I've become. You know, the nonprofit organizations that I lead successfully in Brooklyn, New York. So I am saying that, again, collectively, we must all do the work. We probably might not know everyone, that's fine. But I think that if we know the work that we are capable of, I think that the Virgin Islands can be the true American paradise that it is. So God bless everybody. God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor. Lisa, you got the mic. I'm coming back to you. Come on, close it out strong.
Okay. Remember, well, one of a very powerful song that I like to embark on is "Listen" by Beyonce, and you know it also kind of touches on what we're talking about. You know, listen. So I know you said that much of the people that's involved in the chaos watching, but if you happen to be one of them, then okay, this is me. So I'm screaming now for my dreams to be heard. They will not be pushed aside or turned into your own, all cause you won't listen. Listen, I am alone at the crossroads. I'm not at home in my own, and I try to say what's on my mind. You should have known, no. Now I'm done believing you. You don't know what I'm feeling. I'm more than what you made of me. I followed the voice you think you gave to me. And now I gotta find my own, my own. Sorry guys, I'm a little shaky. I'm scared. Oh my God.
And folks, I just put her on the spot. I didn't tell her at all.
Right, I'm y'all nervous in there.
An artist can have the stage, and I'll say in closing.
All right, Benny, sign her up, okay?
Yeah, there you go. I love and appreciate you all. I love and appreciate the Virgin Islands. And if it's all are we, it's all are we. And until our next town hall, dear USVI, let's keep working to be, like the pastor said, the American paradise. I'll take it further. The world's most futuristic paradise, like I love to say. And I thank all our partners via the UVI Center of Spirituality and Professionalism, Office of Senator Jackson. Man, look, it's a great time to be a Virgin Islander. And I'm gonna say that until the wheels fall off. So thank you, good night, we're signing off.